this is RTX Sydney, the Aussie arm of the Rooster Teeth Expo, and I went along for one main reason. It was my first opportunity to get some true blue hands-on with the Nintendo Switch. With literally just days to go before its launch, I was very eager to get some sort of idea about how excited or how disappointed I should be on launch day when I pick up my pre-order. And after 2 hours waiting in a slow line, standing on a bare concrete floor in abject boredom because I forgot to bring my 3DS, all the while my feet getting sorer and sorer and the pain in my back building like a storm front made entirely of agony, it was time. In total, I spent about an hour and a half in the booth trying out each flavour of Switch experience as thoroughly as I could. If you guys want, I can put up more videos focusing specifically on the games you see me playing here, but this video is more about the core hardware experience.
Blunty!
Alright, next up, we got James Turner.
What's going on?
Enjoying the Switch?
Yes, it's quite nice. Played some ARMS. It's good. It's good.
And of course I had several experiences from standard console TV mode through to the handheld and tabletop modes, and while Nintendo still haven't talked about what specific screen technology they're using in the Switch, the image on the screen was certainly very crisp, the colours and tones were reasonably vibrant and clean, the viewing angles were very wide, which of course is vital for a screen intended to be shared in 2-player modes. My guess, given all of this experience, would be that it's one of the simpler IPS derivative screens. That's a good thing. In TV mode, it was, well, fine. 2 experiences defined it for me. One was Zelda, the expansive new sandboxy way to play Zelda, and it looked nice up on a large screen. Not nearly as nice as a PS4 game, for example, but certainly classically Nintendo pretty. And at the other end of that spectrum, Street Fighter II, a bright, crisp, colourful 2D arcade game, which I'm told has 2 graphics modes, one using the traditional pixely sprites, and one using these new Street Fighter Alpha-like, more hand-drawn, sketchy-like sprites. And it too was super clean, very vivid and smooth. But let's face it, the TV mode was never really a concerning point, so let's move on to the screen. The Switch's own screen, and the revelation that it is only 720p, a rather laughable number by today's standards when even the phone in your pocket is more likely to have a 1080p screen, if not 1440p or even 4K, was a sticking point, or at least something to argue about in forums for many. But 720p is there as a triple compromise, and there is some logic behind it, and it does make sense. Firstly, it's so the game rendering power requirements stay lower to keep the CPU heat and battery drain somewhat under control. 2, to keep costs down, of course, to make it practical to make and sell this thing at the price they're selling it at. No way this thing would sell if they priced it like an iPhone or other high-end smartphone. And thirdly, lastly, at this screen size and below, on a device meant to be used in a relaxed arm's length kind of condition, or indeed on a table in front of you, the pixel density, even at 720p on a screen this size, is enough to deliver a clean, crisp image without the distracting eyesore of many jaggies like we get on the 3DS's 240p top screen, for example. Actually in use, playing games on it, it's entirely practical at that resolution. Zelda and Mario Kart looked pretty great, ran smooth, motion looked nice, there was no obvious or detrimental levels of motion blur and pixel smearing and that kind of thing. The glossy cover over the screen was moderately prone to reflections and glare, but not too severely, at least not in Nintendo's carefully lit booth. We will have to wait and see how much of an issue this is in the real world, outside, under the sun, and in open, brightly lit places. You'll be likely to play this thing, like airports for example. But indoors, relaxing on your couch or curled up in bed, I don't see it being an issue. The tabletop mode, though, well, it falls apart a bit here. Having 2 people crowd around this comparatively tiny screen, while the viewing angles are indeed great and mean you don't have to sit shoulder to shoulder with someone just to be able to see the screen and play properly, but it is a very small screen to play on in 2-player desktop mode, and doing so makes it feel very far away, and a bit silly if I'm honest with you. Single-player desktop mode, where the screen will be likely much closer to you, should work okay, but 2-player desktop mode, well, it certainly works well enough to be useful, but it's not the best experience you can have with a Switch. Which brings us to the next vital consideration. The Joy-Con controllers. I was able to try all but one of the standard controller configurations. I tried the handheld mode, the desktop mode, and the Pro controller. What Nintendo weren't showing at the show, though, was the Joy-Cons in their little plastic handle thingy that comes with it, so I can't speak to that personally. I've heard it works well, surprisingly well according to some, but I will reserve my own judgment until my full review when I get my own Nintendo Switch to play with. The Pro controller, though, is great. I think perhaps the weight and comfort and size of the Wii U's own Pro controller may be a little bit better. I'll have to do a side-by-side comparison to be sure, but the Switch Pro controller is perfectly serviceable and kind of average. It feels very much like any halfway decent generic Xbox-style controller does. Weight is good, balance is good, the thumbsticks and buttons have classic Nintendo feel and response to them, and while my own Nintendo Switch pre-order does not currently include a Pro controller, after spending half an hour with it in a couple of different games, I think I will need to pick one up soon after launch. I'm not getting one at launch because I do kind of want to force myself to use the linked Joy-Cons in the little plastic shell thing for a while first, and if I had the likely inherently superior Pro controller, there would be less incentive for me to do that. But yeah, the Pro controller is nice. But be aware, both the Joy-Cons and the Pro controller's trigger buttons are digital, which is a bummer for those who like racing games, for example, where analog control is kind of vital, or any number of other game mechanics which benefit from a fine analog control on the triggers. Like, for example, if we do indeed get the speculated, or at least deeply hoped for, GameCube games on the Virtual Console. Many of those titles used analog controls very deeply and quite nicely. The Joy-Cons themselves overall felt good too. Typical fine Nintendo build quality, they do, despite their small and fiddly appearance, feel like a premium build. The finish and feel is pretty great in hand, actually, and in handheld mode, while they docked to the screen, it's a pretty decent experience. The right thumbstick does seem a bit awkward to me, mainly while using it to move the camera in Zelda. It's in a weird location. The lack of horizontal space on the controller means it's not quite in the right spot to make it feel wholly intuitive to move your thumb from the buttons to the stick and back along, again the lateral arcing curve of your thumb's natural range of motion. In fact, the same is true of using the left side's buttons as the kinds of quick inventory switching inputs you'd often use the D-pad for on a PlayStation or Xbox controller. I don't think it's something I can't adjust to, but it certainly stood out to me as slightly awkward. Otherwise, it felt pretty good. Again, thumbsticks and buttons feel classically Nintendo. Good feel, good tactility. The thumbsticks do click in, and the click was nice. Not too stiff, not too soft as to be accidentally hit. The triggers fell naturally under finger, and while the shoulder buttons are necessarily quite thin, they weren't an issue in use. Docked to the screen, it is not the best controller experience, thanks to the necessary compromises to make them work as an almost seamlessly elegant snap-on accessory without adding the Wii U controller-style bulk, but they are compromises I feel will be easy to live with once you get used to them, especially when it does mean having home console game-level experiences made portable at will, which is, of course, one of the biggest selling points of the Nintendo Switch. In ARMS and several of the 1-2 Switch games, I got a sense of how the motion fidelity and fancy new haptics felt. Those haptics work nicely, but not quite as groundbreaking as the marketing would have you believe, but certainly a step above the basic rumble stuff. It actually reminded me a little bit of the haptics engine Apple invented for their MacBook clickless touchpads, the evolution of which now lives in the iPhone line. More than just a rumble or a shake, you can get a small sense of almost texture, but again, not really as astonishing as the marketing claims it is. The motion controls felt good too, easily and instantly recognizable as superior to the Wii remotes and Motion Plus remotes. They feel sharply responsive, accurate to even subtle movement, but in ARMS, a boxing-style arcadey type game, it was pretty clear they're not even close to the industry leader in tracked motion right now, the HTC Vive's controllers, which I have actually used in a boxing-type game, so it is easy for me to make a direct comparison here to the same types of motion. Of course, the Vive controllers use much more sophisticated tracking technology, so it's no shock that they're better. But while in ARMS, I sometimes felt a bit sloppy with my control, there was still the sense that it was quite responsive, and frankly, ARMS worked better as a game than I was expecting. Far from being the clumsy, vague mess that was Wii boxing, to which ARMS is being compared often, this feels like a whole new bag. So hopefully, when and if we see motion-controlled games on the Switch going forward, it will be less of the stupid waggle mechanics of the Wii's day, where waggle mechanics were jammed in just because you could do waggle mechanics, and it was just a gimmick that too many games developers couldn't resist jamming in there even when it made no sense. This time around, we should, hopefully, get a more subtle, sophisticated, and careful use of the feature. Even the stupid collection of gimmick minigames that is Switch 1-2 was more fun than I thought it'd be. I, along with everyone on the planet, still think it's offensive that it's not a freebie Wii Sports-style pack-in title, and instead Nintendo are actually asking close to full friggin' AAA price for it, which it just is not worth, not even close to being worth that kind of money. But if it ever does drop in price or comes on sale, which is unlikely because Nintendo first-party titles hardly ever do, it might be worth picking up for $20.
Yeah, milk it.
Milk it.
Yeah,
you
man.
like that?
Yeah,
you like that?
You milk it
you
good.
Like that?
Just like that.
Just
like your mama does.
They're just jealous. No.
Yeah, milk it up.
Oh, it's so good. Use that milk. Okay. My wrist is hurting now. Home stretch.
Oh, the long stretch. Here we go.
That's it. Oh, he's done it. He's taken it.
Hey, you want
yes.
it?
11 for 9. Yes. It's all in the wrist. It's all in the wrist. You gotta get the wrist.
I yield to your wrist action.
But back to the hardware. The general size and weight felt good. It's got a little heft to it, enough to make it feel significant in hand, but not heavy. Of course, the models here all had security clamps and tethers on them, which affected the weight and balance, but still. The thickness is about right, chunkier than your average current model iPad or Android tablet, but comfortable. In fact, I'd have happily accepted it even thicker for the sake of a larger battery. But it does balance well in hand. Your fingers sit flat against the back, spreading the weight nicely and making your hold on it feel relaxed and secure. It's a pretty comfortable way to play, in fact. Docking feels smooth and easy. It located itself well. It didn't feel like I had to slide it around trying to find it to locate on its connector. In two-player tabletop mode, where each person gets one of the paired controllers turned sideways in some kind of nightmare vision of NES's alternate history where it had a thumbstick instead of the now forever classic D-pad, well, here's the thing. The controller is tiny, it is cramped, it is thin, it is oddly shaped to hold sideways thanks to the trigger button jutting out on just one side, and rather more dramatically worrying, the controls are asymmetrical and lopsided in its layout of the traditionally balanced and evenly spaced directional control and buttons. This is easily the worst way to use the Joy-Con, but that's only comparatively so. Despite my masculine and large man paws that would make Emperor Trump look down at his vestigial claws and fly into a jealous rage, and despite having spent 3 decades of my life with more or less symmetrical controllers of all kinds, playing this way did work well enough to make it worth doing. I didn't play for super long, so I can't speak to the hand cramp situation that may well develop from clawing around these comically small lumps, but what I can say is that in-game I felt in control. It didn't feel clumsy or especially awkward. I started out with the Player 2 controller from the right side of the Switch. After a few races and battle mode rounds in Mario Kart, I swapped controllers with the person I was playing alongside so I could experience both, as of course they are, asymmetrical and misbalanced in different ways. And neither Player 1 nor Player 2 controllers felt inherently better or more comfortable. In both cases, the jutting trigger button on the back was the least comfortable part of the experience, partly because it made it awkward to grip onto, partly because it was only on one side, so it felt misbalanced and a bit awkward. But again, it certainly works well enough for a spot of fun, but I do question the practicality for longer two-player sessions. But in that case, there is already, of course, third-party accessory makers fiddling with cheap snap-in grips to make this whole experience a bit nicer if it is something you're likely to do on a regular basis. So even that is not an insurmountable problem. All in all, my first 90 minutes or so playing around with the Switch in various configurations was a good one. The hardware certainly feels nicely refined, especially compared to the original ugly prototype-like DS model, or indeed the chunky and hideous Wii U controller screen deck thingamabob-doodler. The Switch's industrial design feels positively classy. It looks great, and feels pretty nice too. So on a hardware level, I feel pretty confident about the Switch. I was already intrigued and hopeful about the hardware, but now, with some hands-on experiences reinforcing that, I feel like it won't be a stretch to allow for an expectation that this could maybe be Nintendo's nicest hardware to date. And those quotes from various developers you may have read floating about how the Switch feels like it should cost a bit more, well, they're not too far off. The screen, the premium feel to the materials, and Nintendo's usual high attention to detail on the controller mechanics themselves do give it the impression that it feels a bit more premium and less Wii U plasticky toy than I was expecting from Nintendo. But that is just a clever trick of material and industrial design. It's nice, but do not let it fool you. The real test of the design and build quality and premium feel won't be felt for at least a few months of these things living in the real world, bouncing around in daybags, sliding between couch cushions, and of course the living hell of the backseat of a family car where some sprog child spreads jam and snot into its many crevices. Only then will we truly see how robust this thing actually is. But with only days to go until launch, I do have a fresh sense of confidence in the Nintendo Switch, at least on a hardware level. The game library and the vital third-party support that will keep this thing from the miserable, pathetic and lonely fate of the Wii U, well, that's another story altogether. Fingers crossed. I have, since the announcement of this thing, been hoping it would be Nintendo's return to glory. I'm not especially confident it will be, but again, at least on a hardware level, it feels like they've nailed it, so there's reason to hope. Thanks for watching, I am Blunty, and I'll catch you next time.